Hey, we're back. It's kind of hot. I should not have worn a sweater on a 60-degree day. But anyway, we are back. Brie T, episode 11 or 12. I'm gonna say both. Episode 11. Take one. Yes, it is episode 11. We're back. I missed this. Okay, everybody, welcome back to a new episode of Brie T TV. As always, I'm your girl Brie T, and I'm back. I want to thank you guys for sticking around while I took my little hiatus just to regroup and restructure and kind of just replenish everything as a whole. It was really productive. Like, my break from Brie T TV and just all of my endeavors was really productive because when quarantine hit, I was like, now I have all of this time. I was recently laid off from one of my jobs that contribute the majority of my income to sustain my life, basically. So that was a lot of change that was going on. Then I was like, okay, well, now I have all of this time. I feel like I should turn into like Rise and Grind Twitter and just churn out all this content. And on top of that, like I mentioned in the video on Instagram, I was going through a lot of emotional and mental things going on. I was still trying to work through certain traumas that I was just really pushing to the side, and being isolated and by myself, it was just dredging up to the surface. And on top of that, I work with youth, inner city youth in Philadelphia as a part-time job, and I'm an educator, a media educator in that sense, but my students still need kind of a support system as well, an emotional support system. So then that was taking a lot of my energy there, and just overall I was just feeling really overwhelmed. And on top of that, I was trying a new endeavor of breaking into like the natural hair YouTube, but I realized that I have such deep-rooted physical insecurities about myself that was just like staring me back in the face. So overall, just a lot of bullshit that was going on, and emotionally I was just getting drained and I needed a break. But I'm back. I definitely think doing the 2-week a bi-weekly upload, which is every 2 weeks or twice a month, however you phrase bi-weekly, that would be better for me, but it'd also be better for you guys because I'm keeping my promise to you guys. I'm giving you quality content, not just a quantity of content. So without further ado, let's get into this episode. Now, this episode is going to be a little different. I'm experimenting with voiceovers and new techniques, but let me explain why. So, as you know, this is a media, film, advice, tip, rant channel. And I like to give tips so I just don't have a bunch of videos ranting and raving and I look like a fucking lunatic. And so, one of the things I was working through during quarantine was how to maintain pre-production and just overall production on my newest film, and also handling all of these ideas that I have popped up, because I just assembled a really great crew. Shout out to my girl Michelle for wanting to help me with it. I love her so much. Michelle, I know you're watching. You a real one. But with that being said, I need to learn new practices in order to adapt of how to be a filmmaker through quarantine. So, how do you fucking do that when you can't go outside of your house? Very important question. You use Zoom. So in today's episode, I will be showing you guys how to maintain a great interview visually, sound-wise, through the use of Zoom. And if you don't know what Zoom is, you probably do, because now everybody and their mom now has a Zoom account or has a Zoom meeting or a Zoom session at some point. But it really was just for classrooms and classes, just to be able to connect face to face. It's honestly like a big ass FaceTime, and it doesn't matter what device you're using. You just need to have a freaking camera and a mic. And that's Zoom. If you don't know what Zoom is, I will link down one of their promotional videos in the description box down below. But I'm pretty sure we've been in quarantine for a month now. You know what Zoom is. So we're going to use Zoom and use that as a way to still structure a technique, an interview technique that still is beautifully visually done. Audio is there. We got this. So, without further ado, let's hop on to that part. Okay, are you guys ready? We're gonna get into this little quarantine Zoom series that we're going to do just to get some tips and tricks on how to film or create content, interact with people, get good visuals, all while staying in the comfort of your own home. So, like I said, we're going to be using Zoom for this series. So, I'm pretty sure all of you know what Zoom is, whether or not you're using it for school or you're using it personally or professionally, or you're just watching the news. If you've watched the news, they typically do interviews using Zoom. The newscasters have their setup, which looks a little bit better, but you can tell that their interview subject is using Zoom, which is just their camera or their iPhone or tablet or whatever. So we are going to do that, but I'm going to show you a few things I've learned while teaching my students on how to do an effective Zoom interview, which can still give you the feel of actually being there with them. So we're going to go ahead and launch Zoom. We're going to connect. And so obviously we're going to do new meeting. No one is set up with me right now, so I'm going to do some editing magic in post, but just stay with me. Okay, so this video is going to be a little short and seems kind of choppy because I originally filmed a longer, more detailed version for my students, but it contained the faces of my students. And while I do have release forms from their parents, I just don't feel comfortable using their faces, and I wasn't feeling well enough to film it all over again in detail and arranging a meeting with somebody so I can use them as an example. So that's why it looks a little choppy, but there's a full length series to this, so it's all going to come together when it's over, I promise. But if I was in a real meeting, one, you should always do full screen, but also above here there will be something that along the lines that says like speaker view or gallery view, and you can see different screens, all the people that are in the meeting. Ideally, you would want to conduct an interview with just one person, and you would select speaker view, so all you would see is their face. Now, when you have your interview subject, you would then ask them, one, to pick a spot in their home that they find visually appealing and that they would like to be their background. And also keeping in mind when you're asking them to do that, also remind them not to have any personal information behind them on walls, pictures that they don't really want to see. Zoom quality does vary based on the computer you're using, the device you're using, and your internet connection, and theirs as well. So it might not be super clear for some cases, but in some cases you might get clearer background pictures. So if there's a picture or a piece of information that might be considered sensitive, also remind them to kind of tuck that away or angle their computer. In terms of angling their computer, make sure, because I know you all have seen the news interviews, or even if you're taking classes where the person's face is dead in the center. This is how we're going to be using the rule of thirds technique while in Zoom. Have them sit somewhat away from their computer and have them angle the computer. Tell them to lean to the side, turn their body so they're following the rule of thirds. Following the rule of thirds, basically. You don't want them smack dab just looking dead center at the webcam, and naturally that's what you would do. But if you think about it, when you're on set with an interview subject, you angle the camera so it's not directly at them, or you angle your interview subject so they're not staring directly at the computer. At the camera. So remind them that that technique is still okay to use. Tell them that they don't actually have to continue to look at the screen unless they hear some interference. But they don't have to continue to look at you. Have them angle their body. Maybe their eyes are still looking at the computer in the webcam, but their face is not dead in the center. It just looks really awkward, like a grandparent trying to FaceTime you. And that, it can work, but rule of thirds always is the best rule of thumb to follow. Now, lighting. Lighting is also super tricky because it's something that we love to control as content creators, especially when we're trying to aim for keeping visual continuity. Lighting is going to be the devil in this situation because you have zero control over it. Ask them to go to a well-lit room using natural light, but also where they'll have lamps and, lights and stuff. Always keep in mind, obviously, with natural light, if you're going to rely on natural light, look at the weather. Always try to do an interview between golden hours, which is noon to 3 p.m. That is when the sun is at its highest. That's when it's going to be at its brightest if you're going to rely on natural lighting. But also keep in mind, natural lighting does differ. It depends if a cloud just rolled right on by the sun, something's blocking their window now, all of that can happen. But that lighting is okay. Those lighting issues are okay. Keep in mind, if you want to control some of the lighting, simply ask them to adjust the brightness on their computer. Because when it's yellow or warm light from their room or sunlight, that harsh blue light is a horrible contrast. So and I use this practice when I'm teaching my students, I'll put my brightness on like the second to lowest setting. So my face isn't washed out, it isn't ghastly, it doesn't look like I'm Casper, and it's not blue. You might get a darker picture, but you can always play with the highlights and contrast in post. But you can't really get rid of that bluish white glow that they have. Also, and depending on where their complexion is, that can really wash them out and make them completely horrible, and it just visually is no longer a good interview. In next week's episode, this episode is a little short because I want to keep it as short as possible because there's so many steps to do. And then eventually I will combine all these videos for my students because, as you know, I teach high school students film and cinematography techniques for a nonprofit. So that's why I'm trying to keep them short and simple to keep their attention span going while they're adjusting to all of this being at home. But in next week's video, I'm going to talk more about audio and how you can kind of control audio and just really, really masterfully get a really good interview that doesn't look like a grandfather not knowing how FaceTime works, okay? So I'm going to leave you looking at my face a little bit more, and then I'll see you guys next week. Alright guys, so that's the end of part 1. How to structure the interview setup, how to effectively explain to your guest how to set themselves up, because it's really, really hard to get a visually pleasing interview when someone just has their face to the camera of their MacBook or laptop or iPad or phone. Headphones kind of look really bad. And it's okay when you're trying to do a very quick interview if you're on the news. But when you're trying to use it in a film piece, you kind of want it still to be visually appealing and following some cinematic rules. So, I hope you found this first part eye-opening and helpful in certain ways. And I hope you guys stick tuned for the next part coming in 2 weeks. We'll see you in 2 weeks for part 2 of our quarantine film tips and tricks. I actually might break it up and do something different so it's not just all of my quarantine content flowing after the other. Don't know. We'll see. You know how I like to change my mind. But that's all I have for you guys today. I am so grateful you guys stuck around. I hope you guys like this video. Don't forget to like it. That really, really helps. Likes really, really help. Comments are super helpful. Let me know what you want to see. Let me know what you think of. Let me know how quarantine's going on with your creativity or just overall your mental health. You know, if you need to talk, we're open. Don't forget to visit our new website though, BrieTTV.com. New and improved. I'm all about growth, and we're going to continue to grow as a family and just grow overall from the channel to the website to personal growth. But I'm going to be done rambling right now. And that's all I have for you today on Brie T TV. As always, I'm your girl Brie T. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram at BrieT.TVCOM. I'm going to say that every time. Thank you so much, guys. See you in 2 weeks.